have you ever seen a movie with a character on the autism spectrum? Well, what if I told you that the media is getting some of these portrayals wrong? In this presentation, I will be using 4 different movies as examples. Each of them feature a character on the autism spectrum. The first 2 are Rain Man and Mozart and the Whale. These ones are a little less realistic in comparison to the reality of autism. And the second 2 are Temple Grandin and Adam, which are more realistic in comparison. First, I'm going to define autism for those who may not know what it is. It's mainly characterized by social deficits and cognitive deficits, and here's some of the symptoms here. And Asperger's is a milder form of autism. In my research, I found a couple different character models of autistic characters. I'm using 3 of them here. The magical or savant, the quirky or the different, and the realistic portrayal. Before I get into the specific examples, I'd like to list off some ways that people on the autism spectrum are often portrayed in the media. I'll be mentioning these as I go along, so my hope is that you'll be able to apply these whenever you see a movie with someone with autism and be able to recognize them more. In more recent years, films have depicted autistic characters in an overly positive light. For starters, they mainly feature high-functioning characters who are likable in spite of their quirks. Now, this is kind of a problem because autism is a wide spectrum, ranging from very low functioning to very high functioning and anywhere in between. And also, most of these characters are savants, or they have a special talent. And it seems that the media is trying to put autism's best foot forward in the sense that they don't show the worst struggles, even of the higher functioning individuals. Also, most of these films either have a happy or an unrealistic ending. My first example is the 1988 film Rain Man. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this. I put the plot summary up there in case you're not. So, Raymond from Rain Man encapsulates the magical or savant character model. He has an incredibly fast memory for dates and past events, and he can solve complex math problems as quickly and accurately as a calculator. While these special characteristics might make for a good story, it's actually not very realistic because the majority of savantism is actually very rare. While it does occur more in autistics, it's not like how the media shows it. It's a very rare condition. But ironically, there are hardly any autistic characters that aren't savants. Throughout the film, Raymond remains a likable character in spite of all of his awkwardness. But this is also unrealistic in comparison to the majority because unfortunately not all people on the spectrum are likable. I have a real-life personal example. I know a professional who works with kids with autism. And there was this kid who, after meeting people, they would go online and look up their name and address and personal information. And it wasn't really to follow up or to mean any harm, but the media might look at that and think, these are really creepy or unpleasant traits, and they might not want to show that as a result. Going back to Rain Man, they also have a happy ending. Though Ray had to go back to the institution, his brother Charlie had the opportunity to visit him still, leaving the film on a happy note. While a happy ending is attainable, not every person on the spectrum is lucky as Raymond. I personally know a lot of people on the spectrum who don't have that kind of support system, and they would fall through the cracks and really struggle through life on their own. So for the next film is it's Mozart and the Whale. It's the 2 main characters encapsulate the savant or the quirky character models. And right off the bat, they establish that the 2 main characters are savants. Again, this is an unrealistic assumption compared to the reality. They also seem to be more quirky than impaired because they appear a little more closer to normal than the average autistic. And this is shown by the fact that they have social deficits, but they don't show any cognitive deficits. Also, the romance aspect of this film is rather interesting. What connected Donald and Isabel in the first place was only their Asperger's symptoms. And somehow it still worked out in the end in spite of all their problems. Now, it's good that they could relate in this way, but in the real world, for the relationship to work out, they would need a little more in common than just having Asperger's. So I think this example of a relationship between two Aspies, or people with Asperger's, is unrealistic. The next film is Adam. This 2009 movie is a more realistic portrayal. It shows many of the symptoms of Asperger's, including the not-so-lovely ones. It also doesn't make the character into a savant. This film also has a romance aspect, though it's between an Aspie and a neurotypical or a normal person. Adam starts out as a likable character, but spoiler alert, the audiences may be disappointed later on. The relationship ends when Adam makes a statement that shows an unpleasant lack of consideration for his neurotypical partner. He suddenly transforms from a likable character to an unlikable one. While this film did leave me a bit uneasy, I do commend it for being realistic. The next film, this is Temple Grandin. This is a biographical film about a well-known professor, author, and autism activist whose interest in animals helped create a more humane method in the livestock industry. This film mainly focuses on her life as a young adult, showing her struggles as well as some of her greatest triumphs. Although Temple's character is played by an actress, the real Temple Grandin was involved in the production of the film to ensure accuracy, and that's her on the right. Temple was portrayed as a highly intelligent, high-functioning individual because in real life she is. But she's not portrayed as a savant. They didn't blow up her skills because they aren't really that extreme. They're just pretty much on the normal level. Her successes and happy ending in the film are justified because they're accurate to Temple Grandin's real-life story. Now keep in mind, this is just one unique case of autism. So while the film does reflect her life, it's not meant to reflect the lives of everyone on the spectrum. Based on my observations, the most accurate examples of autism can be found not only in films like Adam and Temple Grandin, but also in documentary films and YouTube videos either involving or produced by people on the autism spectrum. Though even though documentaries aren't exempt from bias like every other type of media, they are more realistic than fictional portrayals in movies. This is because they capture real-life events rather than staged ones. Aside from Temple Grandin's biographical film, there are several documentaries about her experiences. I found them to be even more insightful than her film in providing more in-depth information on autism. Also, documentaries I tend to favor the most are the ones produced by the quote-unquote subjects to show their perspective. So, some shameless self-advertising here. I made this film, Through Our Eyes, Living with Asperger's. It was produced to show the perspectives of people on the spectrum, including myself and some of my friends. While there are plenty of YouTube videos and self-made documentaries from higher functioning individuals, unfortunately we don't hear from the more severely affected. As I mentioned earlier, they're not really mentioned in the media very much, and they're almost entirely absent from movies and TV shows. However, thanks to the internet, there are a few cases where some of the severely affected do express themselves. I have a few examples here. I highly encourage you to check some of these out. They're great. Most of them are nonverbal. Some of them have found a way to communicate through typing, but please do check those out. Based on all my research and personal experiences with autism, I've come to some conclusions about what might improve the autism portrayals. First of all, both the media and consumers should rely more on individual accounts from autistics. Media creators should also involve autistics more in the production process to ensure accuracy. And for more realistic examples, consumers should turn to documentaries and YouTube videos with actual accounts from those on the spectrum. What I hope you take away from this presentation is that everyone is different. The media can never fully capture our lives, whether we have autism or not. The very best sources of understanding that we have is ourselves and each other. Any questions?
Even though all of the portrayals are not all accurate as you've shown us in your examples, do you think it has at least opened the discussion and at least an awareness of people with autism and Asperger's, so that rather than people just thinking, oh, what's wrong with that person, they're strange, there's at least maybe more understanding?
Yeah, I do agree. I think it's hard to say because, sometimes they say, bad press is better than no press. But I think, just for awareness purposes, I think it's all good. But at a certain point, if enough time passes by and these things, don't, if the incorrect parts of the portrayals don't change, then people are going to continue to have misconceptions. So again, while I do think it's good for awareness, I guess my main argument is that some of these things need to change. And in my research, I've actually found out that it is starting to change. So, in kids shows, they're talking more about Asperger's and autism in a more accurate way.
Oh, that's good.
My question is similar in terms of the categories. And I got what you said, which you just did, that there seems to be a trend, that this is moving in a particular direction. But the categories you identified all seem somewhat positive to varying degrees, right? Despite the inaccuracies. In your research, did you find portrayals that were more negative?
Well, not really. Those are ones that are actual I guess you say label portrayals that I found. But there are some that are more negative. I don't quite have a name for them, but for instance, there's this organization that some of you may be aware of called Autism Speaks. I personally don't support them because they portray people on the spectrum as having a disease that needs to be cured. So I wouldn't know what to call it, but it is more negative, and it just show it from more pity, tragedy kind of standpoint.
In your research, along with the movies and documentaries and things that you showed, were there any other movies or television or documentaries that you looked at in the course of your research that you liked or disliked or?
Oh yeah, there were some others. I have a hard time remembering off the top of my head because I looked at so many of them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mentioned documentaries about Temple Grandin. There's several of them. There's one that I really like called Woman Who Thinks Like a Cow. Basically saying she just thinks differently. But she gets really in depth about her experiences with autism, even beyond what it shows in her film. So I think that's a really good one. There are a lot of other ones that I found on YouTube. I'm on YouTube more than I am on TV. So I found one that was about younger kids, around age 10 or 12, and